This video is sponsored by VPN provider Private Internet Access with 30 million downloads. A VPN, or virtual private network, gives you a secure and safe connection to the internet, changing your IP address and rerouting internet traffic through an encrypted tunnel, hiding your online activity from watchful eyes. More importantly, with Private Internet Access you can open up a world of new content from all around the globe that may have been previously unavailable to you. Simply change your connection location to one of the 75 nations around the world, and you'll be connected to the internet via that region in seconds. TV series and films only available to stream in certain regions are now viewable while you wait patiently for the latest operations room releases. Private Internet Access is the world's most transparent VPN provider, with 100% open source software, and it's available for all platforms including iOS, macOS, Windows and Linux. Signing up for Private Internet Access is risk-free, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you have any questions, they have a customer support team of experts available for you 24/7. Try Private Internet Access right now by using our link for complete digital privacy for less than $3 a month and 2 extra months for free, a massive 83% off. Less than a week after the Battle of Savo Island, Henderson Field, the main point of contention for the majority of the Guadalcanal campaign, has been captured and made operational for US aircraft which will become known as the Cactus Air Force. Compared to the formation of mostly older cruisers that Admiral Mikawa had to hand at the Battle of Savo Island, the Imperial Japanese Navy task force now heading towards Guadalcanal with fresh troops and supplies for the land campaign is considerably more powerful. Whoever controls the airbase at Henderson Field will dominate the skies during the day, but in this early stage of the campaign, the numbers of aircraft that carrier groups can generate is still larger than the capacity of Henderson Field. Even if they can't stay around all the time, they can still support US troops and the Cactus Air Force against Japanese land assaults on the island when these mass in strength. Thus, the Japanese launch a counter-offensive named Operation Car, with a primary objective being the destruction of the 3 US Navy carriers in the area, USS Saratoga, Enterprise and Wasp. Fresh Japanese troops will also help the land offensive to take back Henderson Field itself. The Japanese force en route is divided up into 3 primary groups, 2 heavy surface groups and a fleet carrier group, with the transports and their covering forces operating in their shadow. The force includes the 2 largest and most modern carriers in the Imperial Japanese Navy and arguably in the world at this time, Shokaku and Zuikaku. Also, the light carrier Ryujo and the seaplane carrier Shitose, the battleship Mutsu, and battlecruisers Hiei and Kirishima, along with 12 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers and 30 destroyers. Land-based aircraft from Rabaul are also prepared to intervene in large numbers. The plan is to locate the American carriers, then send in the massed air wings of the Kido Butai to destroy or cripple them. Following this, a charge of the surface units will aim to catch the remaining US ships and repeat the success of the Battle of Savo Island on a much larger scale, hunting down any crippled US Navy carriers or their escorts. With the seas cleared, the troops can be landed safely, and the heavy surface ships returning from the destruction of the US Navy formations will provide heavy shore bombardment to suppress Henderson Field, support the landings and bring the campaign to a swift and decisive end. On paper, the US Navy forces seem hopelessly outnumbered. Whilst they have 3 carriers, Saratoga is a converted battlecruiser whose great size only yields a maximum air group of similar size to the much smaller but purpose-built Enterprise. Wasp also carries a large air group, but on a smaller displacement. This capability has been bought in part by eliminating many of the protective systems found in the Yorktown class, and she is known to be very vulnerable to damage. However, with a slight advantage in air group numbers, if it comes down to a surface action, the US Navy has only 1 battleship, the USS North Carolina, along with 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, both the small Atlanta class, and 18 destroyers, to face off against the much larger Japanese formations. These forces are split into 3 task groups, each centered on a carrier, but without troop transports to cover. They are more mobile and of course entirely dedicated to combat. With the existing ground forces on Guadalcanal ramping up hostilities, the US Navy formations close on the island to provide additional support as the Japanese forces are descending from the north. The 21st through the 23rd pass with neither side actually realising the other was on their way, despite a large number of scout and recon flights by both sides, and with a single Japanese scout plane shot down. This changes on the 23rd, when a Catalina flying boat spots the Japanese transport ships only. US aircraft based on Henderson Field and from the Saratoga are scrambled to find and attack them, but on spotting the Catalina, Japanese Admiral Tanaka quickly orders the fleet north. The US strike aircraft don't find anything. Having found no sign of any significant Japanese warships, and with a troop convoy that appears to have made a run for it, Admiral Fletcher remembers an intel report he'd received earlier. Indications point strongly to an enemy attack in force on Cactus area, 23rd to the 26th of August. From available intelligence, presence of carriers possible but not confirmed. Important fueling be conducted soonest possible, and if practicable, one carrier task force at a time retiring for that purpose. Thinking a Japanese offensive is thus shortly to arrive but not yet present, Wasp and her escort of 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser and 7 destroyers are sent off to refuel, leaving Saratoga, Enterprise and their escorts near the islands. The stage is set for the 3rd major carrier battle in the Pacific, and the 2nd matchup between Fletcher and Nagumo. On the 24th of August, the light carrier Ryujo moves forward to launch a strike on Henderson Field. This is designed to serve 2 purposes: damage or destroy the US aircraft based there, reducing their ability to hit back, and secondly drawing attention to the small carrier and its escort group, hopefully preventing the Americans from noticing the 2 much larger fleet carriers coming up behind, which are primed and ready to launch the signature Japanese mass strike the moment the US fleet reveals its position. US forces, including flying boats and carrier aircraft, are conducting multiple recon missions. Enterprise launches almost 2 dozen aircraft for this purpose. Eventually it pays off, and in the early afternoon they spot every Japanese formation with the exception of the fleet carriers. Missing this vital piece of the puzzle, American analysts conclude that the Japanese have launched a massive attempt to retake Guadalcanal with land forces, with only a single light carrier for air support, a force concentration the US Navy can easily overwhelm. It seems too good to be true, and as a result, Admiral Fletcher is suspicious. He can't ignore the chance to take out an enemy carrier, even a small one, with what seems like overwhelming American air superiority. But he also doesn't believe that this would be all that the Japanese Navy would send to cover such a large troop formation. Thus, he sends half of Saratoga's aircraft off after Ryujo, but keeps most of his aircraft, including all of Enterprise's available air group, back, just in case. Ryujo's limited air group arrives and attacks Henderson Field. Between the base's own fighters, ground-based air defences, and the fact that a much larger strike force from Rabaul that was to join them has been forced back by bad weather, the 6 bomb-equipped Kates accomplish little other than losing half their number to US defences. Whilst this is going on, a Japanese scout finally spots the Saratoga and Enterprise at just before 2:30 PM in the afternoon. Minutes later, the aircraft is shot down. The loss prompts the Japanese to launch 2 successive waves of aircraft, each containing 27 dive bombers with escorting fighters from Shikaku and Zuikaku. In addition, the Japanese heavy surface forces are ordered to increase speed and advance, aiming to hit the US forces at night and destroy any survivors of what will be a glorious Japanese victory. As these Japanese aircraft are launching, 2 US Dauntlesses manage to spot the Japanese fleet carriers and after sending in a report, launch an attack. A single near miss inflicts very minor damage, but a number of the Japanese fighters from the first strike group break off and chase after them, reducing the escort fighter strength of the Japanese strike force. However, the scouting report does not reach the officers aboard the US carriers. Saratoga's strike aircraft now arrive above Ryujo. The 38 carrier aircraft are mostly Dauntlesses, with a small number of the new Avenger torpedo bomber also in company. Due to the range of the strike being too long, there are no F-4F Wildcat fighters. There is minimal Japanese fighter cover and a relatively small AA battery on the Ryujo. Some Dauntlesses are directed to attack heavy cruiser Tone, but the commander changes his mind and orders all aircraft to attack Ryujo. 2 Avengers don't get the message in time and execute an unsuccessful torpedo attack against Tone. The Americans manage 3 hits on Ryujo with 1,000-pound bombs, despite well-executed evasive manoeuvring. Ryujo also takes a single torpedo hit. The bomb explosions cause a nasty fire, but her damage control teams do an excellent job in putting out the flames. This is helped by the lack of fueled and loaded aircraft aboard, and most of the bomb damage is limited to the upper and more lightly built structure. Unfortunately, the firefighting prevents action to stop the flooding caused by the torpedo hit. Within a couple of hours, the order to abandon ship has to be given. A dozen of her aircraft are still in the air and are forced to ditch. By 4 PM, the US Navy still has no clear idea of where any of the larger Japanese carriers are, but the Japanese know where they are. The USS North Carolina's cutting-edge new radar set has spotted the first major attack wave from those carriers heading right for them. The situation isn't looking good for the Americans. Fletcher's instincts have been proven right. He has 25 fighters already in the air. Another 20 fighters scramble from Saratoga to intercept the Japanese. In the aftermath of Midway, the US has added an additional squadron of fighters to each of its carriers. Overall, 53 fighters get airborne, and more are being brought up on deck from below on the two carriers. Unfortunately, US Navy fighter direction is still quite limited, all signals and response being broadcast over a single channel, which has already been overloaded with excited pilot traffic. Enterprise's log records, after the initial contact between our fighters and the enemy, the radio discipline was bad. At many times, 2 or more pilots were trying to talk simultaneously, and much of the traffic was non-essential. The air was so jammed with these unnecessary transmissions that in spite of numerous attempts to quiet the pilots, few directions reached our fighters, and little information was received by the fighter director officer. Between this confusion delaying the dispatch of the orbiting flights on the right vector and altitude, and a heroic effort by the handful of escorting Zeros, most of the VAL dive bombers moved to begin their attack runs. Both carriers' flight decks had been full of armed and fueled strike aircraft, who have been waiting to go on a sighting of the enemy's ships. But thanks to the radar warning and some quick thinking on the carrier's part, these are rapidly launched, getting airborne just before the VALs arrive overhead. The Dauntlesses and Avengers are told to fly north immediately and sink anything they spot. With the late arriving Wildcats now dropping in on their tails, the VALs make their attack runs, mostly heading towards the Enterprise as she is the nearest target, with those going for the Saratoga having to fight their way through increasingly numerous clouds of F4Fs. Despite the fighters and the best efforts of her AA crews, 9 VALs drop their bombs on Enterprise. These 9 bombs all miss. The next line of Japanese aircraft correct this mistake, scoring 2 hits, the bombs landing near the aft elevator. The first bomb does the most damage, punching through multiple decks and exploding largely amongst the provisions and store areas. The next hit explodes in the hangar, but since this is largely empty, the main damage is the detonation of some of the charges on a nearby 5-inch AA gun. Total casualties between the 2 hits amount to 74 killed. A third bomb hits shortly after, partially detonating and blowing a 10-foot hole in the flight deck next to the amidships elevator, but, thanks to the decision to fly off the strike aircraft earlier, does little else. Seeing the plumes of fire and smoke coming from Enterprise, some of the VALs break off and go after the North Carolina instead, assuming Enterprise is done for. This accomplishes little except to demonstrate what happens when a column of fragile dive bombers walk into the fire zone of 2 capital ships, along with those of the cruisers Portland and Atlanta, with some Wildcats also helping out. All of the VALs are shot down. Such is the ferocity of the AA fire, observers on other ships would later report that the Atlanta was on fire, but the ship had not been damaged. The continuous fire of her 5-inch guns and AA batteries simply made it look like she was burning. The Japanese believe they've badly hit 2 carriers, likely due to the confusion from the attempted attacks on the Saratoga, but have paid a heavy price. 25 of the 37 aircraft, 77% of the strike force, will not be coming back. Enterprise alone has expended over 14,000 rounds of AA ammunition of various calibers. Thanks to the last 7 VALs' decision to go after a battleship instead of compounding the damage caused by the earlier hits, Enterprise's crew are able to fight the fires, which are confined to the aft end of the ship. After just a couple of hours of work, the ship is recovering aircraft again. However, as this begins, water and foam used to fight the fires drips down into the steering room, flooding and shorting out the steering motor and leaving the Enterprise sailing in a circle to starboard out of control, frantically signalling the escorting ships to get out of the way. as the exhausted crew hunt around for a pump to clear the room and for an engineer to get the motor working. As Enterprise pulls donuts in the ocean, the second wave of Japanese aircraft is unable to find the US carriers and turns back. They unknowingly come within 50 miles of their targets. With their aircraft recovering to either Henderson Field or back to the carriers themselves as night falls, Fletcher takes his ship south at speed. Like at Midway, he correctly deduces that the Japanese surface units would try and close for a night surface action, something he knows he has neither the ships nor the training to fight. The Japanese heavy ships sail on through the darkness, but find nothing, turning back around midnight so as not to be vulnerable to US air attack themselves the following day. 5 destroyers sneak in to shell Henderson Field by night. The sudden scream of exploding shells on the airbase something which would become a recurring feature in the next few months. Thinking that the US has no operational carriers left in the area, the troop transports head towards Guadalcanal, but come under air attack from Henderson Field's aircraft, which haven't been as badly affected as the night bombardment mission leaders had hoped. They sink one of the transports and a destroyer whilst badly damaging another, the destroyer that is sunk being a rare example of a level bombing aircraft actually hitting a ship at sea, albeit a stationary one. This forces the troop convoy to withdraw. With the Japanese reinforcements delayed, but still much needed, they will eventually be sent in on faster destroyers, which forces them to leave most of their heavy equipment behind. Henderson Field's aircraft will go on to exact a heavy toll on the Imperial Japanese Navy over the rest of the campaign. Although the US naval forces have fallen back, the battle has ended in the US Navy's favour. Whilst the Enterprise will need repairs, the fleet has lost less than 24 aircraft and fewer than 100 killed, few of whom were pilots. Conversely, the Japanese Navy has lost a light carrier, a destroyer and a transport, with 2 other ships damaged and several hundred killed. But more critically, almost half of the naval aircraft committed to the action have been lost, along with most of their scarcely replaceable veteran pilots. For the moment though, both sides' carriers would be away from the action, refitting, refuelling and repairing as appropriate. One soldier on Guadalcanal observing, everyone is withdrawing but the Marines. The next major battle of the campaign would be another nighttime cruiser clash, the Battle of Cape Esperance.